So it is that time once again, and yes, this video might be out a little bit later than I intended, but cards all out on the table. I got really sick right after Christmas this year, so I was laid out for quite a while. I didn't even have the strength to make this video, but I'm back on my feet now. So this is my spoiler review for Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker. If you have not seen Star Wars: The Rise of Skywalker and you don't want to know anything about the film, switch off now. I have a spoiler-free review. You can go and watch that, then go watch the film, or the other way around, and then come back and watch this film, join in with the discussion. If you don't care about spoilers, or you've given up caring on things altogether, or you're just too tired, then by all means, carry on watching, but we are gonna get into some spoiler territory, and there is a lot to cover from this film, so strap on in, guys, and let's get into it. So as I said in my spoiler-free review, I really loved Rise of Skywalker. I thought it was a really great addition to the franchise and capping off the entire series of films. There was actually very little that I didn't like about it, but it's gonna sound from this review like there were some things that I really didn't like about the film. So here is my kind of review of the choices that got made in the film and how it affects the universe. I mean, the Star Wars universe, not like the whole universe in general. I mean, it's great, it's a great franchise, but let's keep it in perspective. The biggest of which is Rey's heritage. Now, this whole franchise has kind of been about who is Rey? What is her part to play in the whole Force scenario? Where is she descended from? Why is she so powerful in the Force? Why is she almost equal to Kylo Ren? And The Last Jedi kind of gave the impression that actually her lineage was from nothing, like she came from nothing, her parents were nothing, and that essentially she is just a very gifted individual. And that obviously didn't really go down well with a lot of fans, which is understandable because you kind of want there to be reasoning behind things sometimes. And again, this was actually a choice that I thought was a relatively bold decision to make. Who's to say that the hero has to be descended from something, has to be descended from the light side or the dark side or anything like that? Why can they not just be a particularly gifted individual who has come from nothing? Which I guess was kind of what the very last scene of the film of Last Jedi was trying to get across, but that again didn't go down well with fans. So it turns out in this film that Rey is descended from Emperor Palpatine, and actually I quite liked this. I enjoyed the fact that everyone was kind of going along the lines that she had descended from someone drastically from the light side, like perhaps a distant cousin of Luke Skywalker, or a descendant from Obi-Wan Kenobi, or something like that. But turns out she's a descendant of Emperor Palpatine. Let's face it, that raises a whole other series of questions. It does mean that there are some other source materials now that I guess must be canon at this point. But either way, there's still a whole lot of questions about just exactly who it was Emperor Palpatine was getting down with. And I've heard a lot of people going, oh, well, this just retconned everything that they did in The Last Jedi. Why does it have to retcon everything they did in Last Jedi? It doesn't. How is Kylo Ren meant to know that Rey was a descendant from Emperor Palpatine when no one at that point even knew Emperor Palpatine was even still alive? So I don't feel that this is a whole, like, retcon kind of job. It may not have initially been the plan right from the start. It may well have been, I don't know. No one really knows until someone opens up about it from the committee. But essentially, I think it may have always been an idea that Rey was descended from someone very strong in the dark side of the Force, and giving her that duality of, well, I'm training in the light side, but is that my true calling? Now, there was one thing that happened in the film that I'm still really not sure about. Okay, so the whole of the start of The Rise of Skywalker is based on the fact that there is now a spy in the First Order who is leaking out First Order secrets to the Resistance in order to give them the upper hand. Great, it could be Benicio del Toro's character from The Last Jedi, because he was utterly kind of useless in that film and really annoying, and we might not hear from him again. So maybe actually it is him and he had a plan and now he's leaking secrets. No, none of that. Turns out General Hux is the spy. Now, I don't necessarily have that much of a problem with him being the spy. It sort of makes sense after a while of thinking about it. Because basically this was the guy who in The Force Awakens was giving a huge rousing speech to thousands of stormtroopers about how they were going to burn down 5 planets at once and completely do away with the New Republic, and the First Order was going to be the only order in the galaxy. That guy was the guy who is now leaking secrets to the Resistance. His reasoning is that he doesn't care who wins as long as Kylo Ren is completely out of the picture. So, okay, it serves his purpose for, at this point, the rebels to be winning out over Kylo Ren so that he can seize power from him. That kind of makes sense. The bit that bugged me was the announcement with which he does it. It's a little bit on the nose. Finn and Poe are there kind of captured and they're waiting to be executed by stormtroopers. Hux comes in and says, "I'll take it from here," turns around, shoots the stormtroopers and goes, "Hey guys, I'm the spy." And it's like, alright, why? And okay, maybe it was meant to be a comical moment rather than a, oh wow, that happened kind of moment. But again, it's not necessarily the fact that it happened, it's how it happened. And then of course 5 minutes later it doesn't even really matter because Richard E. Grant works out that he's the mole, turns around and shoots him, and that's the end of Hux. So I feel like that kind of announcement of Hux being the spy was really, really short-lived for all of the build-up that it had and then the announcement that it got. I mean, it would have been equally as sensible, though maybe not as surprising, if they'd had a completely new character in there being the spy, even though it's still over pretty suddenly anyway, so who knows. I will say the C-3PO in this film had way more input than he has done in the previous 2 films. I had this feeling for a little bit of a while in the last 2 films that actually R2-D2 and C-3PO, having been major players in the original trilogy, were kind of only really in there in the background for the most part in the previous 2. But C-3PO in this film actually had a major part to play, and I actually really liked seeing C-3PO being an integral part of the team and something that they needed to achieve. His usefulness is then being proven. And actually, the moment where he has to have his memory wiped is a little bit sad, and you kind of go, whoa, well, C-3PO has kind of gone through all of this and now he's having it all wiped away in order for them to be able to do this. And that's actually quite noble of him to do that. Of course, once again, he does kind of get it all back at the end because, you know, it's C-3PO, you want him to have that. The other thing that kind of bugged me a little bit was that the obvious Chewie fake-out death is pretty obvious. There's this moment where Rey and Kylo are fighting over a transport ship using the Force because they're obviously both equally that powerful that they can just move spaceships, and Rey lets out a little bit of Force lightning and it blows up the ship, and it's a ship that you believe Chewbacca to be on board. And I was kind of thinking in the back of my head, well, okay, if that was the death of Chewbacca, I think it would have had a little bit more resonance than what they've given it in this scene. And obviously it turns out he isn't, because if you kill off Chewbacca, the fans are gonna riot. But again, it wasn't just that the fake out was obvious, it's that they kind of didn't really keep it going. Rey only really believes that Chewbacca is dead for kind of a considerably short amount of time. like, if they had kept that going a little bit, she may have had a bit more of a reason to be fearful of her powers and question her motives and everything like that. But they didn't really get that much of an opportunity to explore that because they just wanted to get Chewbacca back into the loop. Now, one thing I was very worried about when this film came out was how they were going to handle the appearances from Carrie Fisher. Now, this is obviously a very sensitive subject that this film has to address, because obviously Carrie Fisher is no longer with us, and she was no longer with us before this film started filming. But Princess Leia, as a character, has an integral part to play in this film. This is, by all means, a very difficult and sensitive feat to pull off. It is with a lot of pleasure that I actually say the parts with Carrie Fisher were handled surprisingly well. You can tell at the start, when she first appears, there are some shots of her that look a little bit dodgy, like they have superimposed her on there, and they've used some sort of mapping software for her face. As the film goes on, it gets a lot better. She doesn't actively do a whole lot in there, because what they've done is they've taken old footage from Force Awakens and Last Jedi that didn't get used, repurposed it for this film. Some of what she's saying is a little bit vague, and maybe the eye lines of the characters like don't quite meet up, but it does have to be said that for all intents and purposes, the appearances from Carrie Fisher as Princess Leia in this film were handled really, really well, and that is by no means an easy thing to achieve. Now, another gripe that I noticed that a lot of people have kind of been mentioning recently is the use or lack thereof of Rose Tico. Now, I understand that Kelly Marie Tran went through a pretty hard time after The Last Jedi. She was subject to a lot of criticism, and that wasn't really her fault. And actually, her character is not that bad. It was just that the character journey that she went on wasn't all that great. But I feel like for the sake of appeasing fans, having her appear in this film and then not get used a whole lot after that was a little bit of the filmmakers kind of going, well, we have to listen to the fans and letting them win, rather than taking Kelly Marie Tran and writing her into this film in a bigger part and changing that opinion. I feel like that would have been a far better use of her and her character. There are also a lot of force powers in this film that you haven't seen in Star Wars films before, but they are part of the extended universe canon. So it's almost like Disney are kind of cherry picking things from the books or the comic books or things like that that they actually want to have in these films, but without making everything canon. Like, I've never seen a character force heal someone before, and that is ridiculously overpowered. The fact that Rey can force heal people, I mean, it's great, but it's powers that you've never seen before. In fact, it's not really like Rey's taken any damage through any of the films in order to really force heal anything, which is strange. But she does force heal Ben Solo. And yes, I will refer to him now as Ben Solo. She force heals him after their fight, and that's almost like that's the turning point from Kylo Ren back to Ben Solo, because he's realized that actually he's been beaten by someone completely outright and they spared his life. And then you get this amazing moment where Han Solo comes back in a kind of vision of his and is like, I forgive you, and is going, okay, Han Solo is back, and Han Solo is saying to his son, it's okay, you can be good, I believe in you. And it's almost as if it's saying to the audience, do you know what, it's okay now, it's okay for you to like this character. And it's like, well, is it? It's not exactly like Ben Solo gets completely redeemed in this film from the few actions that he has at the end. But it is a major turning point in his character, and you do realize that it's almost like this is what would happen if Darth Vader came back to the light before he'd started dying and taking too much damage. He and Luke would have fought the Emperor side by side and completely obliterated them. And this is kind of what we're seeing now in this film. I like seeing the fact that Ben Solo had this turning point, had this quasi-redemption arc, and then came back to do what he knows he should have done from the start. Now obviously most of the point of Rise of Skywalker is that Emperor Palpatine is back somehow. He managed to survive being thrown from the top of the Death Star right before it blew up for the second time, so somehow he managed to survive. But this is the point, I would kind of like to have had a little bit more explanation as to how he is still around. You get a little bit of a glimpse into it, that basically the path to the dark side has kept him alive, and perhaps he's siphoned life force off from other people to keep himself alive. So you get that kind of hint as to why he might still be alive, but it would have been good to see a little bit more of his surroundings and how he's being kept alive and what he's been doing this entire time, other than clearly making Snoke clones. And then of course Rey and Ben Solo team up to take him on, take him out, and it completely takes it out of Rey. And then Ben Solo comes in and he's at one with the Force now, and he uses his abilities to kind of force heal her as well. And then they share what might well have been one of the most awkward kisses in the Star Wars franchise. Yes, even more awkward than the Luke and Leia one. I was like, they're probably not in their right minds at the moment anyway. They've just come out of this very, very stressful situation. So we'll just excuse it this time. And I mean, it is right before Ben Solo fades away into nothing, so you can kind of count it as almost like a goodbye kiss anyway. So, you know, whatever helps you sleep at night, Star Wars fans, whatever you really want, who knows. And then there's this great ending scene where Rey is back on Tatooine, outside Luke Skywalker's home on Tatooine, bringing everything back round in one circle, and she is burying the lightsabers of Luke and Leia together in the sand, and she's constructed her own lightsaber. It looks to be a double-sided one out of metal from her staff that she uses, and she's completed her training as a full Jedi. And the lady asks her, "Who are you?" She says, "Rey," and she says, "Rey who?" And she looks over and she sees the ghosts of Luke and Leia, and she says, "Rise Skywalker." And I know that the filmmakers were kind of expecting that to be like a cheering moment. Yeah, carrying on the Skywalker name. I genuinely couldn't decide whether I liked that or not, because if this whole series has been about Rey finding her heritage and working out where she's from, obviously the name Palpatine is not exactly associated with good things. It's essentially like saying, oh yes, my name is Rey Hitler. Okay, we understand it's associated with really bad things, but it would make more sense if she didn't hide that fact and turned it around, almost as one last slap in the face of the Emperor, going, your name means nothing anymore. This is my name now, and I'm gonna make it mean something good, and your legacy isn't gonna mean anything. But I think for the sake of simplicity, she says Skywalker in order to continue on the Skywalker legacy and bring about a new era of Force users and everything like that. So I suppose it's equally as meaningful that she uses the name Skywalker, but it just makes you question the validity of why she was seeking out her heritage the entire time. But perhaps that was the point. Perhaps the point of her claiming the name Skywalker is to make you question these things, to make you wonder where it's going to go from this point. And ultimately, yep, I don't really have a problem too much with that. It was a great way to end it because the whole film has Skywalker in the title. So it was a little bit expected that maybe she was going to claim the name Skywalker. And again, as I said at the start, it's going to sound like I'm just criticizing parts of this film and that I actually didn't enjoy this film and I have more questions about it. But actually, I have to say, other than the points that I've really discussed here, I really enjoyed The Rise of Skywalker. It was a brilliant Star Wars movie, and I got the exact feeling that I wanted from this film, and that's a feeling of awe and excitement and childish happiness from watching this film. There were so many parts of this film that, yes, may be based in nostalgia, but also were part of the new franchise that really made me excited about it. Lando and Chewie flying the Millennium Falcon together again was brilliant. Chewie finally getting his medal at the end of this film nearly brought me to tears. Nearly. And there was a lot about the visual aspect of this film that really brought it home for me, and that's why ultimately I would have loved to have seen this new trilogy with one through storyline all being taken care of by J.J. Abrams, because the two J.J. Abrams films of this franchise I absolutely love. Rian Johnson did what he did with Last Jedi, and that's okay. But the J.J. Abrams films of this franchise are the ones that really do it for me. But ultimately, I love this film, and it has to be said, I just love Star Wars. So, now that I have discussed all of the spoiler points for me for Rise of Skywalker, and all of the bits that I had questions about, and all of the bits that actually I really did love, what did you think of The Rise of Skywalker? Are you still coming away with questions? What other parts would you want to have seen in this film? What parts are still making you go, why did they do that? Did you love this film? Did you hate this film? All comments are welcome in the comments section below. Let's talk nerdy. As always, if you've enjoyed what you've seen here and you would like to see some more, you can click right here to subscribe and see some more funky, fresh, spoilerific videos from yours truly. And until that point, just remember, whether you're a Skywalker or a Palpatine, adventure, excitement, a Jedi craves not these things.